In this video today, I talked to Betsy Jensen, who not only is she a physiotherapist, she's a coach and she specialises in treating patients with persistent pain, but she's also someone who's had a journey herself through a little bit of a different presentation of chronic pain to one that I normally come across. So rather than musculoskeletal pain, she had a problem called ulcerative colitis, from which she resolved the symptoms using these approaches, and she's applied what she's learned to treating patients successfully in this field. And she tells a really fascinating story, and the insights are well worth listening to. I hope you enjoy this.
We're on. Betsy, thanks very much for taking the time to say hello to me. Just off this recording, we just said we see each other every day, but we kind of follow each other's feeds, I guess. Or I follow you, I don't know if you follow me. But we're obviously interested in pain, and pain is something that we all experience. But unfortunately, some people experience it a little too long for their choosing.
Yes.
And you and I are involved in this kind of work, and I think both of us got to this point by accident. So I'm really interested in your journey into this field as a clinician. And if you're happy to share, I don't know if you've had kind of a lived experience of it in some way that you want to share, feel only if you're happy to.
Oh,
and I've got loads of questions to ask you as well. Is that okay?
I would love it. I'll have like a condensed version of the journey, and I really just feel like my whole life has been leading to this, honestly. As I look back, I can see how I put a lot of pressure on myself and had the classic personality traits of someone who would have chronic pain. So, high achiever and really like to be perfect at things. And I was raised in a religion that, was very prevalent in the community, and it was just very much on my mind. Am I good or bad or doing things right or wrong? And everyone's always watching, and a sense of duty. And so I was kind of primed for mind body stuff, right? And then in college, I was really fascinated with anatomy and how the body works, and also the mind. So I got a psychology degree before I went to physical therapy school. So in all my interviews, I talked about like the whole person and the mind body. And so I was just like, and I took the one alternative medicine class that they had, that they offered. and I think it's maybe, okay, I said I'd keep it short, but it's maybe worth mentioning, so I was in physical therapy school about 20 years ago. And I went to Duke, a great school, great, medical school. And they were just starting to do the research that they have now about, studying pain-free people and all of the research on, the normal degeneration of the spine, and it doesn't cause pain, But I was really taught that if you have pain, it's a sign of injury, or it's about to get injured, right? So just pain means danger, and be really careful. And I can show you how to be perfect and how to be really careful with physical therapy, just perfect posture and strength and balance. And if you do all these things right, then you can be pain-free. And that helped a lot of people. But then for the persistent pain, especially, that kind of perfectionism, I don't think helps. And the fear definitely doesn't help. We know that.
Yeah. Can I ask you then, as a clinician, because I've had this experience, 25 years of physio, and how did you reconcile those that didn't get better with this perfect approach to posture and exercise? And how did you reconcile that?
I mean, honestly, it would bother me. Sometimes I would be awake at night and I'd be like, why is this person not getting better? And I would, sometimes I would blame myself, and sometimes of course I would blame them. And I did find it curious that some people, it was like, their one shoulder would resolve and they come in for their other shoulder, and then they come in for their back, and then they come in for their knee, and then their back, and then their chart is that thick because it was back when we had paper. But yeah, it would bother me. I was like, why is this happening?
Did you see patterns that in patients? Because I used to think we'd have this chat in the staff room, and you think, oh, I'm discharging so and so today. Right, I'm just because it's kind of, there's a black humor around patients, and you talk about with your colleagues what you couldn't talk with a patient, not in a way to make fun of them, but just to kind of deal with the emotional charges of looking after people, there's got to be an outlet, hasn't there? And sometimes
Right.
there's a bit of humor in there. And you nailed on, you're going to discharge this patient because it'll be fine, 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 fine. And you come back in and it's, oh, it's been awful. It's been awful.
Right.
And I'd be like, what?
Yes.
What? How is it awful? But I realize now, I mean,
Yeah.
you could see this as well. It's like, oh, it's about having to do this on their own and they're not ready.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden they have more pain.
And it
Yeah.
just doesn't make sense in biological terms, neurophysiological terms, yes, but
Exactly.
biological, it didn't really make sense, did it?
Right. Yeah. Like even like talking about it now, it's like the perspective I have, it's like, how can you not see it? But when you're in it, when you're in that medical model and, thinking about like, I was treating a shoulder, you know what I mean? Like I didn't even really look at the whole person. I mean, I would try to, of course, right? But the insurance is paying for these, motion measurements and strength measurements and shoulder, you know what I mean? Like you don't even, it's just, it was a different world back then, right? And of course, and actually I started doing a lot of pediatrics. So I was working with parents with children with delays. And so eventually I started just really realizing a lot of these delays in children, just, not the ones that had like cerebral palsy or like Down syndrome or something, but like about 50% of my caseload were kids that were fine structurally, but their parents had so much fear about them like moving, starting to walk. They were late walkers, right? So anyway, I felt like a lot of my job was just calming the nervous system of the parents. So anyway, but during that time, I would still do some like moonlighting, like some subbing at physical therapy clinics. And then I started to really see like the stressed out people, like there was one woman who was just like, most people were responsive when I started talking about stress. And they would be like, yeah, you know what? I have had a lot of stress. But I just remember one woman and her shoulders were right up by her ears and she was like this and she was like, in her 60s or something. She's like, nope, I have no stress. No. I'm like, okay. But most people at least realize like, yeah, my pain is worse with stress. So once I started learning this mind body stuff, the way that I learned it actually was I had ulcerative colitis. So I think I was really good at like managing all the body symptoms because I knew all the knowledge and, stretches and taping. But then my digestive system was just a wreck because I was always so hard on myself. By this time I was a full-time physical therapist and had 4 little kids in 5.5 years. Like that's when I got ulcerative colitis. And we were still like going to church and then kind of leaving the church. So there was just like family pressure. There was just like, it was a, obvious reason that my digestive system was not processing everything. And I was just in survival states. And then, when I started learning about mind body, like everything just clicked. It just actually someone told me like, oh, ulcerative colitis, I've heard that's psychosomatic. And I was like, yay, great. For me, I was like, that's perfect. Like I love that kind of stuff anyway. So if there is a cure other than like taking pharmaceuticals the rest of my life and being scared of food, then yeah. So they had referenced John Sarno's book, The Divided Mind, where he specifically says ulcerative colitis. So that was all I needed. You know what I mean? Like it was just like sweet for me. I was super excited. And then I just like couldn't stop talking about it. And so I would notice like when I would sub at those clinics with the orthopedic patients, the ones that would want to talk, I would kind of talk about stress, and the ones that would open up, I would just like get energized and so excited. And I would just love talking about it. And eventually, I noticed that pattern with myself that I'm like, man, not only could I talk about this forever, like it actually energizes me to talk about it to people. And by that time of my life, I was like going through a divorce and so, just a lot of changes again. But I'll just tell you real quick because it's such a crazy story. I manifest a bunch of money. Like I went to my full-time job and I was like, how can I make some more money? And they were like, if you increase your hours to this amount. And I'm like, I've already been working that amount. So for 2 years, they had not paid me for like 5 hours a week. So I got like 15 grand all at once. And so that was like just what I needed for coach training school. And I just saw that as a sign of like, I had if you read The Big Leap, your zone of excellence. And then I felt like this was my zone of genius, not to sound like braggy, but like I'm passionate about it. I love it. I love talking about it. It energizes me. It's so needed. You know what I mean? Like, and I just have a way of like, I feel like I have a way of understanding it and being able to like convey it to people in a simple way. That's what I try to do at least. And, not everyone is receptive to it, and that's totally okay. But for some people, like they deserve to know this. They deserve to have this information. That's what I think, like there's just so much needless suffering right now.
And that journey you describe as a clinician initially, but the clinician role comes to almost a search to work yourself out sometimes, I think.
Yeah. And I was always into it. Like, even as a teenager, I was buying like self-help books. If I went to the bookstore, I was like, psychology, self-help. So I was just always interested in the mind, always interested, once I found out about like all the body stuff and how you can fix your body when it gets hurt. Like, I was just like, this stuff is so cool. So the mind and body together.
And you can see how you're describing like almost an accidental, it was going to happen at some point, but you got there maybe accidentally or serendipitously, maybe like me too. And I like to present this information to patients, but also clinicians who are exploring it. If you were suggesting to them a way to start, where would you maybe point a clinician in the direction of, Betsy?
Oh, I have literally never been asked that question. I like it. Okay, I'm going to just take a second and think, because for me, it was just like, it was just so natural. Like, it was just a desire, and you know what I mean? It was just, so if they were, are you asking like where they would start? Like with
Well, I've seen some of your influences. I've got some people written down.
Okay.
So I know,
Okay.
I think
I
influence you in a strong way.
Yeah. Well, obviously the best podcast is mine. No, I'm just kidding. I do have a podcast, and we'll talk about that if you want. But I honestly, once The Way Out by Alan Gordon came out, that's just the first book I recommend for anyone, any potential, if you're a clinician and you want to suggest something to your patients, or if you're someone who is like, I don't even know if I have chronic pain, but my shoulder's bugging me for like 10 years on and off, like just read that book. Anyone, IBS, migraines, like, how do you feel about The Way Out? Like, I feel like it's just the newest, it's the most current research. Finally, research is showing, all this stuff that, we were suspecting.
It's very easy to cross-reference that information for people. So if you're not a book reader, you can say, oh, well, it's Alan Gordon's book, but you could listen to his podcast, and you listen to one and see if you like the tone of his voice. You can listen to him working with a patient. There's some clinical research that he's been involved with some other people, and you can cross-reference them. So it's really easy to triangulate around that. Such
a good point. Yeah, because I mean, I guess it really depends on your personal learning style, because for some people, you might suggest a book and they're like, well, I have a list of 10 books already, so maybe in 3 years I'll get to that. But if you're like, here's this one podcast, or here's the Curable app is super helpful, right? For some people, they like that, I want the information, I want something to do, I want an activity. For other people, I'm telling them to more like slow down and don't do so much and start, looking at those personality traits. Like for me, that was a huge part, where just my own, like I was constantly in survival mode because I was never happy with where I was. And I was constantly beating myself up because that's what I was trained to do, to like, quote unquote, be better, right? Like you look for your weaknesses and then you try to improve them. So I was just always like, feeling stressed and never good enough.
Yeah. And what did you apply yourself? Because obviously the information is pretty much useless on its own. For those sometimes that get epiphany in a book, change immediately because the fear drops. But some people have to do or be a certain way. How did you apply that? Were you a book cure?
How did I?
Yeah. Were you a book cure?
Book cure?
Yeah, where you read the book and go, God, I've
You
got
know
it, it's
what? I
fine.
think, like, honestly, for me, and it was Sarno, and, like, depending on who you follow now, they might not even say ulcerative colitis is something that can be healed. But because I read it in that book, and I just already had so much belief of how powerful the mind is, and at that same time, I was reading Joe Dispenza. So, he really has a lot of research, and he is really big into, like, stories of people healing cancer, and really anything's possible. So I think if I had found, Alan Gordon Incurable now with ulcerative colitis, I might have been like, well, that's not for me. I can't really heal from that. But so in that sense, the book really did help me, because just seeing that diagnosis and being like, oh, that's possible to heal, I was like, let's go. Because I had already been into the life coaching world, and then it was easy for me to see how, once I got that, like, your brain can create emotions in your body, and you can feel those things in your body. And it doesn't mean medically that necessarily something has gone wrong, but your mind is controlling it. Then I was just like, click, like, it just really helped.
Did you coach yourself then, or did you look for a mentor in the field to bounce off?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was already getting a lot of coaching. And then yeah, I mean, it's always evolved. I did have a coach that she wasn't as familiar with the somatic stuff, but she was the right coach for me. And just, and then it was right when, like, Curable was coming out, and, like, it was just like, I felt like, and I encourage this with my clients too. I felt like things came to me at the right time of when I needed them. And so, I, on one hand, I wish I had had a somatic coach, like, how I coach people, and I didn't. But at the same time, like, um, I don't know. I think what was clicking for me might not click for other people. I started getting really into, like, law of attraction and the vibrations of emotions, and, like, that all made sense to me. And I was into yoga. And so I just think it was like this combination of everything that was going on. And I had a really, really good friend who was reading the same books as I was, and we would go out to dinner and talk. So it was like, and I had coaches. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it wasn't like maybe the path that you would think of. I did this, I read this book, I did this, but I think everyone's journey is kind of different in that way, right?
Yeah.
Like, sometimes it's not even
Yeah, it's almost organized chaos to enter it, and then it's organized
yeah.
chaos to exit it.
Yeah, yeah. And probably, like, maybe there had been, like, things that I wasn't receptive to earlier, but it just kept, like, coming back for me. And, like, when I was receptive to it, then I was ready. Cause, like, it is like drinking from a fire hose sometimes, right? There's so much information. And one of the things that I struggled with at first was, like, I felt like, again, like, I wasn't doing enough of, like, consuming all the information and doing the things right and doing enough, journaling the right way, like, I had to really see that it's more about the emotion behind the action, which made so much sense to me with,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, it's
even
the
the nervous
intent.
system.
It's not
Yeah,
the
if you're,
behavior, whether it's
yeah,
journaling or exercise or breathing,
yeah,
it's the intent behind it, isn't it?
exactly. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think we both know Dr. Howard Schubiner,
Mm.
and he's
Oh,
such a
yeah,
great guy, isn't he? Because he does for us excitables. He presents a really nice structure.
yeah.
If you've
Yeah,
never come across this work at all,
I agree.
he's very hypnotic and suggestive in a really genuine way, but he won't push you down an alleyway of belief at all. He'll say, this is the information, this is how you present it, and this
Yes.
is what we appear to see, and these are the things that we are seeing with people who follow this approach and consider it. And if you say, that's not for me, he said, I love you all the same.
Yes, that is true. He is, like, such a great example of this work and reference, and he's done so much work over the years. And he has some really great videos. Do you recommend those videos to your patients sometimes? Those
Yeah.
series of cartoon videos explaining pain. And easy to digest. He has that book, Unlearn Your Pain, which is a great reference. It can get pretty heavy. Like it's a lot of, like, you can go really deep with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's made, and more recently, I think he's presented an app, and there's training for clinicians. So he has resources for both routes, I think, doesn't he? Yeah, a recent, I can't remember what it's called, but it's kind of a curably thing, but it's for practitioners to train in that field. I'll give you something to chase there, haven't I? You'll have to search that one. I'll send you the link when I can find it.
Yeah, I
But
love
you know
that.
it all already. You know, we always feel there's something else to know, but that's just our addiction.
I'm a little bit of a Howard Schubiner fangirl, so for sure, like he resonates with me, like the way he says things. So for me, I did his training. Were we in the same training?
Yeah.
I think we were at the same time. And my issues, basically what they found with my colonoscopy is that my ulcerative colitis had resolved, but I still had some symptoms sometimes. So what they said is, if you do have any symptoms now, it's IBS, which was great news because that was when I was finding all this stuff. And so I was like, perfect. But what's interesting is, to me, they felt the same a lot of times. So it was so good knowing that. It was like, okay, the disease is gone. There's no active disease. And if I do have symptoms, even though they feel like what I would say is like a flare, it's just IBS, which we know like irrefutably is mind body, or however you call it, neural circuit or neuroplastic, TMS, any of those. And so then I was doing his training, and he just said, food does not cause pain. Food does not cause pain. He just breaks it down into this simple statement. And it was like, I just started challenging my beliefs. And I remember thinking, I was right in that training, and I was imagining drinking coffee, because coffee was something that I had this love-hate with. And I would do like acid reducer, this expensive stuff I would put in. But even the thought in that moment of coffee made my stomach turn. And that's when I was like, okay, I have my answer. Like, there's a neural circuit or whatever, there's neural pathways of my brain thinking that's dangerous. And I have that physiological response, even just thinking about it. Because he talked about that guy holding a cup of coffee and his headache went away, because he knew that if he drank that coffee, his headache would go away. So his brain just did the like shortcut and made his headache go away when he was holding his cup. Do you remember that?
He presents that predictive coding model in such an easily explainable way, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think he just explains it all so well. And then he has been doing this work for years, for decades. He worked with Sarno at one point.
Yeah. It's fascinating how, again, it's accidentally entering this field when you come in a biomedical model. Most people, unless they're training now, maybe the training is different, but we all entered 20 years ago and longer than that through a biomedical model.
Yeah. Well, what's cool is I did meet someone in a DPT program here, and they're learning about, they call it central sensitization, and it's still a little more structural than what we're into, but at least it's on the right path. And they're training PTs with that. And Lorimer Moseley, like, I had not heard of Lorimer Moseley until that PT student told me. So like that, I was like, oh, there's this whole world of, he knew totally different people than I did, but it was still, it's the same research and information.
Well, I met Lauren, I'm name dropping, but I met him a couple of years ago. Yeah, I met him, and I'm going to go and see him in about 3 weeks. He's coming to town nearby, do a talk, flipping pain. They have a flipping pain campaign where they cycle around the local town and do talks and things. I did it in Australia, and they were doing it with a colleague of mine called Professor Cormac Ryan, and me and him did some research on a talking technique for pain. I might mention it when we chatted before.
True. I didn't know that.
So I'd emailed Lauren Moseley about 4 or 5 years ago.
And
he bounced it back and said, it's interesting stuff, but you need a randomized controlled trial to research it. So I went to Cormac at the local union. So I'm going to go and see and listen to him talk again, because it's so engaging. It's lovely to listen to again, isn't it?
Right. Yes. Yeah, exactly. It just makes you wonder, like, I feel like I'm just scratching the surface, and just like more things are coming out every minute. I don't even know. Like, this is becoming more normalized, thank goodness, because what's happening right now is not working for people.
Can I just, that's a quite a nice segue that into how it overflows into psychological therapies and trauma work. So I know another one of your influences, I almost feel like a stalker because I can plop up things that you've done, but Peter Levine, can you tell me a little about that experience?
Yes. Oh my gosh. So
And for those who don't know Peter Levine, just if you just kind of expand on that.
yeah, exactly. I even have not read all of his books, but I did read Healing Trauma, and that was one of my great influences too, because I was already, as a life coach, I was learning how to process emotions somatically in the body, just which is incidentally the same as somatic tracking, what we do with pain, right? So I was like, oh, so processing emotions is just what they teach in PRT with somatic tracking, which is also basically what Peter Levine is talking about with healing trauma. So that fascinated me. So already I was like hooked. So I did some like studying of somatic experiencing, did a like 60-hour course or something. And then this opportunity came up to do a retreat with Peter Levine in Sedona, Arizona. And I just went for it. There were like 30 people. It was pricey. It was like, out of my comfort zone, but I also, like, as a coach, it was like a business investment. You know what I mean? Like, I felt like a really unique opportunity. So it was like amazing. We spent 5 days with him. He was like in the same hotel with us, and every day we'd like do a few sessions, kind of hanging out with him. And he's into like dream interpretation and all this crazy stuff now. And then he would, of course, do his like somatic healing stuff, and really a lot about learning about the nervous system, and how when we, this fits right in with the persistent pain stuff, when we are going through events that are traumatic to us, and that could even be like falling off a bike, or witnessing violence, or hearing bad news, or a bully at school, or a car crash, like any of those things are traumas as well. And for a developing nervous system, it doesn't even, of course, big T traumas, like, abuse and the things that we know of as trauma, that makes sense, that can prime our nervous system for fear. And then we're always in these survival states and our body's not working right. But like, even just hearing, like, because I had a great family. That's the one part I was like, I don't fit this mold of like, I didn't have a lot of, sketchy stuff. I had like amazing parents. If anything, they loved me so much. They were overprotective, which I didn't like, but you know what I mean? It was like, but I did have a lot of little T traumas. And so, that made sense. And he actually picked me as a participant in one of the it was like probably like an hour-long thing of healing intergenerational trauma. And like participants from the group were people of my descendants. And it was like conversations with them. And it was like, it was worth every cent that I paid. It was so cool. And then
that's almost a little bit like IFA, isn't it? If you're familiar with that,
yeah.
internal families.
Yeah.
IFS, sorry, internal family
Okay.
system.
Just making sure. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly.
So
I was healing these parts. And you know what's fascinating? Because I do want to tell you a couple of things that I did not realize as a coach or from the pain world. He was basically like, you might have more symptoms after this. And I did have some like blood in my stool. Like, so he's like, just so you know, it's not just like, everything's better. Like I did feel like really euphoric and just like I was floating after for a little while, but I did have some symptoms. So just, that was an interesting thing to experience, that he calls it like expand, contract. Like our nervous system will like expand, and then there's some contract, and that's normal. That's how we grow. So that was so good to know. And then, yeah, after the retreat, we met up like a week later, and everyone had just had kind of like a really horrible week. Like we'd returned to our lives, and we were just like feeling yucky physically, and like everyone was like lethargic, and they're like, that's normal. They're like, that again, this expand, contract.
It's fascinating when you think of the different ways you can approach it, from a trauma therapy, and again, this capital T, little t trauma. You don't have to experience that. It's how it's encoded in childhood, and if approval comes from a certain behavior, and your family role amongst the other siblings is, I seem to get more attention from winning a race or getting a grade A, it's encoded in that moment. That's how I should behave mostly. And the people delivering the care and attention in those moments aren't doing it more on purpose. They're just following their own unconscious patterns a lot of the time.
Exactly. They're in their own, survival states. I like to call it survival states more than trauma responses, because, same thing, but
yeah, it's unconscious a lot of the time.
System. Yeah, our nervous system wants to be safe, and we have one experience, and it's like, okay, well, don't ever, stick your hand on a hot stove again, and don't be around these kind of people because they are dangerous in this way. And if you're around these kind of people, show up as not yourself. And we learn those survival patterns. And then, that our digestion isn't working well when we're in fight or flight all the time. We're producing tons of cortisol or adrenaline, or we're in freeze and we're constipated. And you know what I mean? It affects every area of our body, from our breathing to our heart rate, to our blood flow, to our brain fogginess. Like, it's all the nervous system.
So knowing what you know now and experience what you've experienced, what do you offer to patients? How do you present yourself now to the clinical world or the patient world?
Oh, yeah, it's interesting, because now I'm like, I've moved away from physical therapy, so I don't even call them patients now; they're clients or whatever. So I started as just doing one-on-one sessions with people, and sold like 6-month packages, because I really think it's nice to give yourself some time, right? So you're not pressured of like, I have 3 weeks to heal, you're like, you let your nervous system really recalibrate. So that was really awesome to, have a lot of people commit every single week for an hour for 6 months.
It's important for them to commit, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. There were a lot of people that came for consults, and they were like, I don't want to pay that much, or I don't want it to take that long, and I was like, that's okay. You're not my people, because you know what I mean? If I really want to help you make a big change, giving yourself that grace and that time is how you're going to do it
So you established a framework that if someone wants to work with you, then that's the kind of framework you've predefined.
Yeah, exactly. And so that gave me a lot of experience too, just coaching one-on-one, and learning what people are dealing with. And it was actually really cool, because I coached this coach physician who had a podcast. I just was able to, like, she's kind of a celebrity in this coaching world, that she signed up for my free program, and I just offered to coach her for free. And she asked me to be on her podcast after 6 months, because she's this physician that was like diagnosed with fibromyalgia and was told she'd be on this reflex medicine the rest of her life. And she entitled that episode, How I Cured My Chronic Pain and Acid Reflux with Betsy Jensen. And her podcast is for physicians. She does weight loss for physicians. So that was amazing, because I got to coach all of these physicians who were already kind of bought into the idea of like, this reputable physician that I know cured her chronic pain and acid reflux. And by the way, this is before the PRT training, the pain reprocessing therapy training. So I was going off like Sarno stuff. Curable was just starting to come out. I was like, every bit of morsel of information, I was like, tell me how to help these clients, because there are people ready for it, even physicians. And I felt like I was in a great place as a physical therapist, knowing that medical background, and then also being like, and there's all this stuff they never taught you in medical school, which they're like, a lot of it made sense to them.
Yeah. And even with, every patient, every client, every person who has pain, they're looking at what you have to offer through a filter of pain. So it's quite hard to look at it rationally. So they're almost looking behind you at your certificates and whether they're real or not.
Yes, it's true. Like, yeah, like now it's so much easier for me because now I'm like, okay, I have this pain reprocessing therapy, which this is research based. Like Sarno was a great forward thinker and he had a lot of things right, but not everyone wants to be told you need to like journal every day. And, you have all these repressed emotions that didn't resonate with a lot of physicians,
And so do you work in groups now as well as one-to-one?
Yeah, so now, so I did a couple like small groups, and sometimes I offer some small group options, and I have this really cool membership. So it's a lower price point. It's actually right now $49 a month. And so there are 2 group calls per week. So it's where I just get on, and whoever is there, if they raise their hand, I coach as many of them as I can. So, and that happens 2 times a week. And then those calls are recorded for a private podcast. So if you're not able to make the calls or you just want to listen, you can get a lot from hearing other people, their situation, getting coached, and then applying it to yourself. Sometimes even a little more than if you're getting coached directly and you have resistance to what's being said,
Yeah, because the brain's watching all the time. Even if you consciously don't believe something, the brain's going, well, that might be true, that could work for us, that. Give them a feeling to make them feel better as they're watching it.
Yes. And if you come up with the idea, like how much better is that when you're like, hey, you know what I noticed? This person's like me. And then the brain's like so on board, right?
Is it okay if I, when I post this video, to put some links so people can contact you if they want to work with you in some way or search you out and kind of a little listen to you?
Yeah, I would love that. I try to be on, like, I have a podcast. It's called Unstoppable Body and Mind. We'll have the links, it sounds like. And then I'm on Instagram a lot just because I like making reels. And I think it's fun to present information in, in a minute or whatever, or just in that different multimedia format. And then, with my group, I was actually going to say too, like we have some written coaching with it too. So if you're not able to make the calls, then it's like you can still get that written support. So for people who are like, I've tried to read the book and I wasn't one of those self-cure from the book people, and I am not ready to invest thousands in one-on-one coaching for 6 months, and you know what I mean, somewhere in between. And some people actually prefer group coaching because they like, hearing and learning from other people.
There's lots of research that say the group works more powerful than one-to-one sometimes, Well, one-to-one is a group effectively. 2 is a group. Research.
It's true. If you look at it technically. Sometimes just with my own brain, it feels like a group.
and when you 2 people together, you actually get ideas that would never come up singular fashion.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So I'm going to list all these links for you and where people can find out about you, if that's all right. Could I ask you about a couple of other things?
Course.
These are like recent things these are things that kind of come up when you put yourself out there.
Yeah.
So this is when people challenge. I noticed a post recently about people who don't like absolute statements.
Yes, that meme I did, which I thought was really clever. I did a meme that was like offensive to some people, and it triggered my nervous system a lot because I
wondered if it did. I was wondering about that because I saw the pushback.
That's
just for the people who didn't see it. Just describe it.
Okay, so you might have seen this meme, and I think it's LeVar Burton is his name, and this guy, he's like making this smirking face, and he's pointing at his head, like, he's tapping his head, like, pointing at his head. And I said something like, when you realize this is where all pain comes from, because literally, if we just take it literally, and we're not trying to like shame anyone or make a judgment, but we're looking at science, and what we know now is that the brain produces pain, right? Like it is just like a truth. But a lot of people think that when we say that we mean that they're faking it, or that it's all in their head, or that they're being dramatic, or that if they just tried harder, they wouldn't have it, and that they're doing something like, right? It brings up a whole bunch of things for other people. And I knew, right? Like I've sent emails before and they're like, well, why did you tell me it's all in my head? And I'm like, look at the words. I would never say that. I never talk like that, but people receive it in their own way, and you can't control that. And people who've been in a lot of pain have a lot of stories of people telling that, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, here's this other person who's just degrading me. And some people took it personally. And I felt like I'm in this moderator role in this group, so I don't want to be really snarky and mean, and I don't want to be like that anyway, but part of me wanted to just like be a little more blunt. But I also realize it's a person who's suffering, and like, you know, me being a jerk to her is not helping anyone, and it just makes me look like a jerk more than, you know, getting her to see my
it just shows the challenge we have in this game. And it partly, a lot of the time, and I know I've had my fingers burnt. I've had my fingers burnt, partially because of my own excitement.
Yeah.
Because you're presenting an excitable nervous system, somebody who's got an excitable nervous system, but they bounce sometimes, don't they? They've got to go under. I think you've got to go under.
I think you're right. There's a skill, and like some people just aren't ready, I think, you know what I mean? Like, this is a mind body group. And so we kind of thought, especially in this group, I thought it would be like a really like safe and like enjoyable, funny thing. But like some people were like, I can't believe you're saying this. And
but I suppose when you've got people approaching you in the work that you do specifically for that, then the frame of reference is, there already is some understanding, isn't there? And I think in a public forum, there'll always be some fallout. Unfortunately, nobody wants to be upset, but I think the boundaries have to be pushed a little bit. Otherwise, you leave people in their own comfort zone, and they want to share ideas that actually are potentially toxic for other people. So there has to be a boundary. So no, that's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. Exactly. So it's okay to be assertive, I think, but it's easy to feel triggered because we all have our own nervous system that we're kind of playing with and learning how to use.
Yes. Oh, it's so true. And so I'm glad there were some other moderators that I brought that to, and I was like, hey, you know, here's the situation, and I'm like having a real problem with how I'm triggered about how I'm responding, and I don't like that. Like, so then, you know, they brought in kind of this like closing statement of like, this is all we're saying. And anyone, I love how she said, she's like, anyone who says different, that like, you know, is shaming you, like, that's just wrong and cruel. Like, no one is saying that. Like, we don't want to promote that kind of thinking at all. That's not what we're saying. But it's so interesting. I think it just shows that we're so primed for that divide, that when we're like, it's either all in my body or all in my mind. So they learn this approach and they're like, okay, so you're telling me it's all in my mind. And I'm like, no, I'm telling you that paradigm was never true. And your mind and body are like a tree and its root system. Like they're not separate. They're, you know, like, so when they just go to like, it's all in my mind, it just shows me they're just still in that paradigm, and they're not even getting what we're saying at all.
Yeah. If I get that balance point, if you like, I just quickly come off topic and just say, have you been to a funeral before? They go, yeah. So imagine you're going in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Have you been to a wedding? And they go, yeah. I said, imagine you're going in 5 minutes. Like a maths exam. They go, ooh. I said, imagine you're going in 5 minutes. So have you held a newborn baby? Imagine it's in 5 minutes. I said, and that's 4 different physiological states, and you look the same to me. I said, but your pupils dilated, your shoulders went up or down, the blood rushed to your stomach or it didn't, your immune system switched off or turned on. Bam.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
None of that's in your mind, is it? So I quickly show them, feel this, without traumatizing them. Hopefully I haven't been to a funeral the day before, otherwise you picked the wrong cue.
Yeah, you start with that and they're like, oh. That's cute. Yeah, I love it.
So thank you for that. That's because that won't end. There'll always be those challenges, won't there, where you trod on someone's toes and didn't realize it, but didn't mean to. And you know, it's just a learning point, isn't it? Can I ask you about, it's very topical in the UK at the moment, and it's not my field, so I'm quite happy to see, because I see you've approached it, and in the UK, wow, you might get eaten alive with the national conversation about this. It's about menopausal and perimenopausal symptoms. Everything in the UK, everything practically is down to that. In some fields, it's crazy, and I can't say it is or it isn't because it's not my game.
Yeah.
But you raised your head above the parapet.
I know it. I'm glad you're bringing this up and like realizing it does trigger my nervous system a lot to put myself out there to say that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I know so well what Dr. Schubiner says are the symptoms or the common diagnoses of, like typically these are mind body. And then I see these lists of what is perimenopause, and I'm 47. So my friends are starting to talk about it a lot. And people that I coach, right? Like I tend to get this kind of age group and menopause as well. And I'm just like, I just had read this post from someone who I just follow and don't even really know. So I didn't feel like I could say anything, because who wants to post about their physical condition and some random person come and say, that's mind body, like I was like, that's not my place quite yet. But she posted about tinnitus, which like I've dealt with so many clients, and it's just so mind body, right? Like, because a lot of times they can't find anything structurally causing it. And she's like, well, here's another symptom of menopause. And then the threads from there, they were like, oh, same with me. I have this joint pain when I wake up. And same with me. I have heart palpitations. And same with me. And everything they list at frozen shoulder. I'm like, they're calling that menopause? How is this even? Do the hormones just like control every cell in our body?
Yeah, and just affect one shoulder.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, in one shoulder. Do you know what controls our hormones? Our nervous system. So I'm just like this, and places where they honor and revere women as they age, they don't have all these problems with menopause. So that's why I'm like, our culture is really, just as our news system primes us for fear and our health system primes us for fear, and now if you're anywhere from 30 and up and you start having any irregularities in your body, now you have this thing that you have no control over, and it's just governed by the hormones, and half the population doesn't have it, and that's not, what I mean? It's just like so many things. I get like a little activated even talking about it, because I feel like so many women suffer unnecessarily when they have so much power to change things.
Yeah, it feels like there's a wave coming in the UK. And it's almost, I look at it, I think, wow, that looks unstoppable. And I mean, it's something that I won't be involved in. But I've seen a few patients who said, do you know what, the nurses said it's perimenopause, or the doctor has, and the lady said, I'm not having that. No, it's not. And I thought, oh wow, we'll be okay now.
Yes.
Because they're not having it.
I'm glad that's the wave you're talking about. I wasn't sure, because like there are a lot of people that get really defensive about like, hey, I've had this every single period. Don't tell me this is not hormonal. You know what I mean? Like, and
that's the wave, actually. That is what's coming. Wave. So it's actually looking. I don't think it's going to be a good picture for a while.
Yeah. So it's scary for me to talk about it, but it also like makes me really mad inside when I think like, I mean, with a lot of these mind body symptoms, like 80 to 90% of people can respond to them. So I'm like, why make the small minority of people the norm and treat everyone like that and promote so much fear and suffering in the meantime, when the vast majority of people can be helped by these techniques.
It's incredibly liberating to help someone, maybe not the right word, and maybe it's a bit pretentious to say it, but to be alongside someone as they explore this and find out for themselves. It's quite, I don't know what the word is. It's lovely to be alongside someone, isn't it? Because they do it. It isn't you or I, really.
Yeah, it is, just to not feel alone in it, because it is scary to, especially for a personality like mine, to be like, some people don't like me and some people say rude things, and to have people mad at me, that's a really uncomfortable feeling. But at this point, I'm like, if some people are mad, but 80% of the people have help from it, like, it's worth talking about. And I do want to grow my nervous system and what I tolerate, right? I don't want to hide in a cave and not talk about anything. Like, this is part of my work too, is to like make a post and like sweat about it and like check it and then see that I'm safe, and then I'm like, oh, it's safe to talk about this, and someone actually liked it and they shared it and they got mad about it too, and maybe this is important. And but it's like, it's nerve-wracking for me too.
Well, I like what you do, Betsy. I share it, and I kind of find it hard not to follow something that pops up that you're doing. And I wish you all the success with doing what you're doing. I'm very grateful for you sharing your thoughts on all these things with me. And
well, I appreciate it. What a fun
I'm going to put a list of every link I can think of where I found you and share it on YouTube. I have a small group that I'll share it with as well. And if anybody wants to work with you, they've got access to through those links to maybe look at you a little bit more and see if it's something you want to explore with you.
Yes, exactly. And I know I'm not for everyone. Some people don't want to talk about, vibrations of emotions or things like that, but other people that really resonates with. And
and even if they didn't want to do it work directly, I know that you've interviewed lots of different people over time, and they can listen to really interesting guests on your podcast as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I always think is like, sometimes I've listened to someone's podcast for like 2 years before I actually like joined one of their programs. But like, if all you want to do is dip your toe in, then just start with a podcast, or I do like free workshops a lot. Like this Sunday, actually, here's another link. I'm doing like a graded exposure workshop for free that anyone can come to. And then I'm going to do one on getting good at feeling good. That's a chapter from The Way Out, which is one of my favorite topics, is like pleasure on purpose, getting good at feeling good, telling all these people who are perfectionists, like, not only is it good to have some fun in your life and some self-care, it's actually like what you need to do to heal is to start taking care of yourself and having fun and having pleasure in your life again.
Betsy, it's a great message. I love talking to you.
Thanks, Drew. I love talking to you too. I really appreciate being here.
Well, I'm going to sign off now. I'm going to get some tea, English tea, with a big family of 4 kids and maybe some other hangers-on join us.
Yeah.
And have a lovely day. I'll send you this link, so if you want to record, save it somewhere and present it, you're welcome to. And just wish you all the best.
Thanks. You too. It was great talking to you.
Cheers, Betsy. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye. Say hi to Laura Mare for me.